Om Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Good. Be seated, please. Oh, Parameshvara. Om. Om. Yes. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvisha vahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Excuse me. Yeah. Good. Welcome to you all, and welcome also to the viewers watching online. We continue our study of Chapter 9 of the Bhagavad Gita. We'll begin with some chanting, starting with verse 20. And as always, as I'm chanting, be sure to read the translation and then repeat after me. We start with that longer meter. Traividya mam soma paputa papa. Traividya mam soma paputa papa. Yajñarištva svargatim prartayante. Yajñarištva svargatim prartayante. Te punyamasadya surendra lokam. Te punyamasadya surendra. Ashnanti divyan divideva bhogan. Ashnanti divyan divideva bhogan. Te tam bhuktva svargalokam vishalam. Te tam bhuktva svargalokam vishalam. Kshine punye martya lokam vishanti. Kshine punye martya lokam vishanti. Evam trayi dharma manuprapanna. Evam trayi dharma manuprapanna. Gatagatam kama kama labhante. Gatagatam kama kama labhante. Ananyas chintayanto mam. Ananyas chintayanto mam. Ye jana paryupasate. Ye jana paryupasate. Tesham nityabhiyuktanam. Tesham nityab Yogakshemam vahamyaham. Yogakshemam vahamyaham. Tepyanya devata bhakta. Yepyanya devata bhakta. Yajante shraddhayanvitaha. Yajante shraddhayanvitaha. Tepi mameva kaunteya. Tepi mameva kaunteya. Yajantya vidhi purvakam. Yajantya vidhi purvakam. Aham hi sarva yajnanam. Aham hi sarva yajna. Bhokta cha prabhureva cha. Bhokta cha prabhureva cha. Natu mam abhijananti. Natu mam abhijan. Tatvena tashtyavanti te, tatvena tashtyavanti te, yanti deva vrata devan, yanti deva vrata devan, pitran yanti pitravrataha, Pitran yanti pitravrataha, bhutani yanti bhuteja, bhutani yanti bhuteja, yanti madhyajinopi mam, yanti madhyajinopi mam. Very good. So, chapter 9, as we've discussed, jnana and vijnana are the topics. Jnana, knowledge. Vijnana means a special kind of knowledge. And there are several ways of interpreting that title. Remember that the title is not part of the Gita itself, added by a later scholar. So there are several ways of interpreting that title. One way is jnana is knowledge, and vijnana is knowledge plus bhakti. That's one of several ways of interpreting it. It could also be knowledge with experience or knowledge with realization. Let's take this second this meaning, knowledge with bhakti, and we're going to discuss in a sequence of verses today that when you're engaged, the topic, by the way, the general topic we're into right now is worship. We've already finished a large portion of this chapter that was focused on jnana and vijnana, wisdom, knowledge of Ishvara. If you're going to worship God, whom are you worshiping? So that topic is mostly complete. But now we're talking about the worship itself in this next series of verses. And in the past two verses, we saw those who worship by means of these elaborate Vedic rituals in which you hire a number of priests. There are a number of ritual fires and offerings made into those ritual fires, often over a number of days. Very elaborate those rituals were. But now, to introduce today's topic, there are two auxiliary factors that are really important to consider when you're engaged in any kind of worship. One is, what is your intention with which you're doing that worship? And second, to what extent do you actually know whom you are worshiping? And both of these are really significant and often not considered sufficiently. First of all, intention. From the two verses we saw in last week's class, we saw that they are worshiping for the sake of reaching heaven. And in fact, Sri Krishna is critical of that. Remember our discussion. He's critical of performing rituals for the sake of going to heaven for several reasons. The main one being going to heaven in the Hindu worldview is not the ultimate goal. It is a temporary condition, a temporary period of enjoyment brought about by your accumulation of good karma through the performances of those rituals. But then we made a further criticism, and that is ultimately then you're doing rituals for the sake of enjoyment. Not worldly enjoyment, but otherworldly enjoyment. To employ rituals for the sake of enjoyment, we sarcastically called it spiritual materialism. It's still a materialistic goal, but it's sought using religious and spiritual means. So Sri Krishna is quite critical of that intention, and he's going to talk about pure intention in the next sequence of verses. So the materialistic intention is when you... By the way, when I say that Sri Krishna is critical, he doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. That's not the point at all. We had a discussion way back in chapter 4. In chapter 7 about the 4 kinds of bhaktas. So when you pray, hey Bhagavan, please, pardon my joke, but Ye de do, ye bhi de do, sab de do. And if you pray in Hindi, give me this, give me that, give me, give me, give me, give me. Sri Krishna is critical of that prayer, but he doesn't say it's wrong. Please understand this point. It's not wrong. It certainly is a lot better than ignoring the role Ishvara has in your life and just going about and trying to get what you want through whatever forceful means you can apply. To fail to recognize the role of Ishvara in your life is really short-sighted. So it's intelligent and meaningful to pray, hey Bhagavan, oh God, please give me this, please give me that, please help me with this. There's this health problem, there's this financial problem. To pray for those, yes, they are materialistic intentions, but at least you're resorting to prayer as an aid to fulfilling those means, which that the context here is you're not ignoring the role Ishvara has in your day-to-day life. So those prayers are meaningful, those prayers are not incorrect, but those prayers are, we have to admit, they're materialistic in a manner of speaking. So Sri Krishna in the coming verses is going to show you what is a pure intention that one can have at the time of worship. That's one thing we'll discuss today. Second thing we're going to discuss, as I mentioned before, to whom are you praying? To what extent are you, to what extent do you know the God you are worshiping through your prayers and worship? I think I told this joke, I think recently, maybe not. The story, yeah, I think I told it recently. The story of Einstein, who was visiting New York, gets into a cab in New York, and the cabbie recognizes his image. Of course, in the early, Einstein's face is famous, printed all over the papers. So this cabbie recognized Einstein, and he says, oh, you're that guy. I don't know if he knew his name. You're that Einstein guy. You must be pretty smart, huh? Now, here's the point of that joke, is how much does this cabbie really recognize Einstein's genius? This cab driver really can't appreciate. He knows Einstein is a genius, but he is personally unable to appreciate it. In the same way, many who worship understand God is almighty, all-powerful, etc., but to what extent do they really know that? Really realize it, understand that, appreciate it? So this is the problem of not knowing fully and completely the God to whom your prayers and worship are addressed, and that's what Sri Krishna takes up in this next several verses. This is verse 22. Ananyas chintayanto mam, ananyas chintayanto mam, ye jana paryupasate, ye jana paryupasate, tesham nityabhiyuktanam, tesham nityabhiyuktanam, yogakshemam vahamyaham, yogakshemam vahamyaham. Start in the second line. Ye janaha, those people who paryupasate, worship. Who worship in pari in various ways. Those who worship whom in the first line and mam. Those who worship me, Sri Krishna says, in various ways. And please remember that when he refers to himself in the Bhagavad Gita, he's usually referring to himself not as Arjuna's charioteer, and not even necessarily as an incarnation of Lord Vishnu. Here and elsewhere, Sri Krishna refers to himself as Ishvara, as the God of the cosmos, creator, sustainer, destroyer, karma pala datta, the one who gives you the fruits of your actions, etc., etc. And that's his context here. So those who worship me in various means those who worship Ishvara, the God of the cosmos, who are chintayantaha, the prior word, who are engaged in thought, thinking of what kind? Ananyaha. Their minds are thinking about ananya. Anya, other. Ananya, non-other, non-separate. Now, I'll paraphrase. Those who worship God in various ways with the attitude of non-separateness. That's that word ananya. Non-separate. So ananyaha chintayantaha, worshiping with his attitude or understanding is better. Worshiping with the understanding that the God who they're worshiping is ananya, non-separate. This is very distinctive teaching of Sri Krishna here in the Bhagavad Gita. Bear in mind that most people, when they pray, they envision that they are praying to a God who is remote, a God who dwells on top of Mount Kailasa, a God who is on that snake bed at the bottom of the Milky Ocean, a God who dwells in some heavenly domain on a golden throne with a big white beard. However they imagine, but they're imagining a God who is separate, a God who is distant, which is not who Ishvara truly is. Based on our discussions earlier in chapter 7 and also in chapter 9, we understand, remember the dream metaphor? Nothing in your dream is separate from you, the dreamer. For your dream creation, you are creator, sustainer, destroyer, and karma paladatta. The giver for you are everything for your dream creation. This is how we understand Ishvara. We are this world is not a dream, but we could say metaphorically, we are in Ishvara's dream. We are all products of Ishvara, who dreams us into creation, who sustains us, and unto whom we return at the end of this cycle of creation. So it's a metaphor. We don't say the world is a dream, but it's a helpful metaphor because it shows our non-separateness from Ishvara. We exist because of Ishvara. Ishvara gives existence to our bodies, our minds, consciousness itself, and everything around us. Nothing is separate from Ishvara. To return to my Guru's words, it's not that there is one God, but rather there is only God. This is the vision of the ancient rishis. This is the message of Advaita Vedanta. And Sri Krishna is most clearly teaching from that level when he says, Ananyaha, those who worship with this understanding of being non-separate from Ishvara. Worshipping an Ishvara who is like the dreamer. Okay, so Te Sham in the third line now. Te Sham, for them. For those who worship with this understanding of non-separateness, or now we can make a connection, those who worship with knowledge. You can worship without knowledge, you can worship with knowledge. You can be like the cab driver in New York with Einstein in the back seat, or you can be like the person Sri Krishna is referring to here. Those who truly know that Ishvara is all. Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, it says in the Chandogya Upanishad. Brahman, a word we can use for Ishvara, is all. All this is nothing but Brahman. All this is nothing but Ishvara. That's knowledge. And what about those who worship with that knowledge? Tell me, the praise of the cab driver means a lot less to Einstein than the praise of his colleagues. Does that make sense? If Einstein is praised by the cab driver, who doesn't mean much, compare that to Einstein being praised by receiving the Nobel Prize. So which is more meaningful when you're praised by those who really know you? That's more meaningful. So here, Sri Krishna is talking about those who pray and worship with full knowledge, full appreciation of who and what is Ishvara, Tesham, for them, for those who are nitya abhiyukta, constantly engaged. Abhiyukta, engaged. Nitya, constantly. Those who are constantly engaged. Can you constantly be engaged in worship? Can you sit around a ritual fire for day after day for the rest of your life, making offerings into that fire? Any form of prayer or worship has a beginning and end. Notice he uses the term nitya abhiyukta here. He's talking about a kind of worship that doesn't have a beginning and end, a kind of, not really worship, but something which doesn't begin and end, something that's continuous. He's referring, of course, to knowledge. Once you know who and what Ishvara truly is, that knowledge doesn't come and go. Your prayer may come and go. Your worship may come and go. But your understanding of who and what Ishvara is doesn't come and go. He's referring to those who have that understanding. They are nitya abhiyukta. They are always engaged with Ishvara through understanding. And let me make that more clear. Always engaged with Ishvara. Let that not be, what do they call it? Lip service. It's a very important statement. Always engaged with Ishvara. Right now, I'll just give you a very concrete and personal example. Right now, I am teaching Ishvara. All that I see is a manifestation of Ishvara. Further, who is teaching Ishvara? Ishvara in the form of this body and mind is teaching Ishvara. Teaching Ishvara what? Teachings which come from Ishvara. This is what it means to be always engaged with Ishvara, is to appreciate that God is all. Not one God, only God. This is the appreciation Sri Krishna is mentioning, and that appreciation is constant. Prayer comes and goes. This appreciation is abiding. So for those who worship with knowledge, as opposed to the prior two verses, those who worship because they want to go to heaven, clearly they don't have this knowledge. If they had this knowledge, they wouldn't be trying to go to heaven. They don't have this knowledge. So here, Sri Krishna talks about those who worship with knowledge. What about them? Yoga kshemam vahami aham. Aham, I. Vahami, I support, I take care of yoga and kshema for them. Now, yoga kshema is a kind of a technical term that's used in the scriptures. Yoga here means acquisition of what you want, and kshema means protection of what you have. Yoga, getting what you want, kshema, protecting what you've already gained. Sri Krishna says, for those who worship with knowledge, I take care of yoga and kshema for them. Now, this is kind of an odd statement. Does that mean if you know Ishvara, then he takes care of yoga kshema for you, getting what you want and sustaining what you already have. And of course, if the contrary point of view is if you worship without knowing Ishvara, then what? Sri Krishna says, then I ignore you. I can't mean that, right? Doesn't mean that. In fact, in the commentary I've been following of Madhusudana Saraswati, he seizes on this and gets into a discussion about it. He says, of course, Ishvara takes care of yoga and kshema for everyone, not just those who worship with knowledge. Even if you have even if you are an atheist, even if you don't believe in God, even if you are convinced God does not exist, if that is your conviction, that there is no such thing as Ishvara, tell me, is that person sustained by the laws of the universe or not? The laws of the universe for Mr. Atheist, we'll call him, does his heart go on beating according to the laws of the universe? Yes. Laws of the universe are whose laws? Ishvara's laws. Ishvara's intelligence making the universe function. Without intelligence, the universe would be random particles. We don't live in a universe of random particles. We live in a highly intelligent universe. The source of that intelligence is Ishvara. Even the source of the random particles is Ishvara. Now, this atheist denies it. He says, no, particles exist by themselves. How did they get there? They're just there. What about the intelligence that makes your heart beat? It just exists. So the atheist doesn't have very thoughtful explanations for how the universe came into existence. Or maybe we can, even if our atheist is a scientist, they are thoughtful, but they view the world in a very mechanical way. So that atheistic scientist who doesn't believe in the existence of Ishvara, who believes the universe is completely mechanical, random particles that are somehow coordinated into meaningful ways so that they can make this atheist's heart beat. But is it not still the case that Ishvara, the creator of this universe, makes his heart beat as the source of intelligence? Let me give a metaphor to make this more clear. Go back to your dream. In your dream, you dream a world full of people, and amongst the people you dream is our scientist atheist, who says this world has no creator. This person in your dream world says there is no creator for this dream world. Do you, the dreamer, continue to support the existence of this atheist in your dream world or not? The moment he says God doesn't exist, does he blink out of existence? He continues to exist. So that's the point Madhusudana brings up in his commentary, and that is, even those who deny the existence of Ishvara, or even those who pray and worship without truly knowing who Ishvara is, Ishvara still sustains them in their lives, supports them in empowering them to get what they want, yoga, empowering them to preserve what they've acquired, kshema. All of this is provided by Ishvara, whether you acknowledge it or not. This is like the child who's learning to ride a bike, is riding, just a 5-year-old child on a brand new bike, is riding and feels so happy that he can ride his bike like this. Right behind him, Dad is holding on to the seat, walking behind him. This child thinks, I'm doing it on my own. The child doesn't see Dad holding on to the bike. So many are like that. They live their lives enjoying the blessings they receive without understanding or acknowledging the source of those blessings. But that failure to acknowledge, if the child doesn't acknowledge dad holding on to the bike, dad still holds on. In the same way, one who doesn't know Ishvara, one who doesn't have any appreciation or gratitude for Ishvara, is still blessed. Blessed, heart goes on beating. Every beat of your heart is a blessing if you understand Ishvara properly. Every beat is a blessing. But then what is the point Sri Krishna is making here? If Ishvara blesses all, whether you know Ishvara or not, what distinction is he making here for those who pray and worship with full knowledge of who and what Ishvara is? Madhusudana very nicely makes the distinction in his commentary. We use that boy on a bicycle example. That boy on a bicycle is holding on to the handlebars afraid of falling over and exerting great effort and tense because he doesn't know dad is holding on. Right? Do you see this? If the child knows dad is holding on, he can relax and enjoy his bike ride. But if he doesn't know God is not God is a metaphor. If he doesn't know dad is holding on, he feels like he's on his own and he can fall off at any moment. That's a nice metaphor. Many people are like that. They feel like they're on their own. Every decision they make in life is crucial. If they make wrong decisions, everything will collapse. And everything could collapse at any moment. Frightening to live a life like that, as opposed to one who understands all this, to use my Guru's words, all this is an unfoldment of Ishvara's order. Ishvara's intelligence is becoming manifest through whatever events are happening in life. Everything is in Ishvara's hands. Everything is ultimately okay. This is the attitude. Like the child who knows dad is holding on to the bike can relax and enjoy the bike ride. One who understands Ishvara's blessings in our lives can relax and enjoy life. Madhusudana uses the word prayatna, effort. Not knowing God's blessings, you exert tremendous effort in life. And one who understands Ishvara's presence in your life, according to Madhusudana, life becomes effortless. You effortlessly continue and enjoy your life knowing that Ishvara is the one who takes care of your yoga and kshema, supporting you to give you what you need and to maintain what you have. Okay, let's continue. Ye pyanya devata bhakta, ye pyanya devata bhakta, yajante shraddhayanvitaha, yajante shraddhayanvitaha, tepi mameva kaunteya, tepi mameva kaunteya, yajantya vidhi purvakam, yajantya vidhi purvakam. Now we're getting the flip side. Very commonly in the Bhagavad Gita, in fact in all scriptures, you give one perspective and then you give the opposite perspective. So in the prior verse we have the perspective of one who worships with knowledge. Now we have the opposite perspective, one who worships without knowledge. And what about those? Yea, those, api, even them, even those who are anya devata bhaktaha. Bhaktaha, worshippers. Worshippers of whom? Anya devata, other gods. Those who worship other gods, who, let me just get part of the verse and I'll explain. Those who yajante, those who worship those other gods, shraddhaya anvitaha. Anvitaha, they are endowed with shraddha, faith. So those who worship other gods, those who are devoted to other gods, those who worship with faith, and other gods, so now we're talking about those who don't have that attitude that Ishvara is non-separate. Ishvara is up on top of, Lord Shiva on top of Mount Kailasa, Mahavishnu on the bottom of the Milky Ocean, that Yahweh, the God sitting on the throne in the heavens with the big beard. So all of these gods who are envisioned as being separate, Sri Krishna is talking about those who worship those gods. And he makes a very interesting observation here. In the second half, he says, Te api, even they, Kaunteya, O son of Kunti, Arjuna, even they, last line, yajanti, even they worship whom? Mam eva. Even they worship me. Those who worship other gods with shraddha, with faith, they actually worship me. So Sri Krishna says, if you're praying to Shiva, you're praying to not Lord Krishna. Remember, he's speaking here as Ishvara. So if you're praying to Shiva, you're praying to Ishvara. Makes sense? If you're praying to Vishnu, you're praying to Ishvara. No problem. If you're praying to our Father who art in heaven, you're praying to the same Ishvara. If you're praying to Allah, you're praying to the same Ishvara. We had this discussion before. There is only one Ishvara. You have no choice. You can't pray to any other Ishvara. There is only one. If you want to envision that one Ishvara as Lord Shiva, Vishnu, Yahweh, Allah, whoever, fine, absolutely fine. Envision that Ishvara any way you want. Pray in any language you want. Use whatever names you want. But Sri Krishna says, ultimately, they are all praying to the same Ishvara, that one God, that only God. I'd like to take a few moments here to make this point exceedingly clear, that that this idea of there being one God. The Hindu tradition, of course, has so many forms in which we worship that one God. You've all heard it said many times, Hindus worship one God in many forms with many names, and we can extend it to say, in addition to Shiva, Vishnu, Ganesha, etc., you can just as well say Yahweh, Jesus, Allah, anything. You can just add it in there. And I want to bring you to the scriptural basis for this. A statement that comes from the Rig Veda that's central to this tradition and so often misunderstood. So let me share it with you and then explain it. So this is the statement from the Rig Veda that explains how it is we worship one God in many forms. And many of you have heard this. I'll use Roman letters. What is that? Yeah. Comes that. Is that all on the board? Yes. Ekam sat vipra. I'll break the words apart. Ekam sat. The T becomes da. Ekam sat. Sat is one. And what is sat we'll talk about in just a moment. Vipraha, the wise ones. Bahudha, in many ways. Vadanti, say, describe. Ekam sat, the wise ones describe that one sat in many ways. And here I just want to point out this problem. And that is, most of the time, this important statement, which comes from early in the Rig Veda, in the first book of the Rig Veda, I just read it, it's Rig Veda 164. So the first of the 10 books of the Rig Veda. So it's early in the Rig Veda this statement comes. And it's so often, the meaning gets twisted, where they say again and again, this word sat gets mistranslated as truth. It can mean truth. Absolutely it can mean truth. So then they say truth is one, and the wise people express that one truth in many ways. Which is a correct statement, but it's not what the Rig Veda says. Because in the Rig Veda, the context makes it very clear that sat here means Ishvara and not truth. Most of the time, sat would mean truth or reality. Here it means Ishvara, and let me show why. So anyway, I just want to point out that you will see this many times, this statement, but most of the time you'll see it mistranslated as truth is one. Let me show you why it's mistranslated as truth is one. Oh, wrong one. Sorry. Where am I? I am here. Okay. This comes from a hymn. All of these quotations from the Rig Veda, they're all hymns. So this is one little portion of a hymn made of verses. Wouldn't it be interesting to see what came before the statement and what came after to get the context? So here's what comes before. Indram, Mitram, Varunam, Agnimahuhu, Ata Divyaha Saha Suparnaha Garutman. Ekam Sat Vipra Bahudha Varanti. Then after, Agnim Yamam Matarishwan. Matarishwanam Ahuhu. Okay, you may or may not have followed that. Notice that what came before, Indram, Indra, name of God, Mitram, God as sun, Varuna, God of the waters, Agni, God as fire, Suparnaha, Garutman, could be Garuda, could also be sun. Then afterwards, we have Agnim again, Yamam, God of death, Matarishwan, God is sun. Is the context truth, or is the context the various deities that we worship? Indra, Mitram, Varuna. The context is the deities that we worship. In that context now, understand this mantra. By the way, any excerpt from the Vedas is called mantra, not just what we chant at meditation and prayer. Anything excerpted from the Veda is called a mantra. So this mantra is clearly talking about deity worship. In the context of deity worship, Bahudha Varanti, the wise ones call those deities with many names, but ultimately, Ekam Sat. Reality is one. God is one. Ishvara is one. If you want to use the word truth, fine. The truth of all those deities is one. But notice that the context is not truth. The context is the various deities that we worship. So let us understand that that's such a frequently, put it back up one more time, this is such a frequently quoted and mistranslated statement from the Vedas. I just wanted to bring it to your attention so that you won't get confused the next time you see that. So, there is but one Ishvara, and if you want to add to that list Mitra, Varuna, etc., if you want to add Jesus, Allah, etc., no problem. Wonderful. And sad it is, I think we would all recognize, that not everyone has this perspective. Sadly, so many people feel that Christians worship a different God from Hindus, who worship a different God from Muslims, etc., etc. And it's such an unfortunate misunderstanding, and sadly, a misunderstanding that causes harm, great harm. Okay, let's continue. Aham hi sarva yajnanam, aham hi sarva yajnanam, bhokta cha prabhureva cha, bhokta cha prabhureva cha, natu mam abhijananti, natu mam abhijananti, tatvena taschyavanti te, tatvena taschyavanti te. Sarva yajnanam, for all rituals. Yajna was the main ritual in ancient times, fire. By the way, if you translate yajna as fire sacrifice, be careful that you remember you're not necessarily worshiping fire, but rather, as I said in the last class, that fire is like the messenger that takes your offerings and conveys them to the particular deity you have invoked through your prayers. So sarva yajnanam, in the performance of all rituals, not just yajna, but all rituals, aham, Sri Krishna says, he, indeed, aham hi, I indeed am the bhokta, the enjoyer, the recipient of your offerings. Not only recipient of offerings, prabhu evacha, and I am the Lord. I am the Lord who is being worshipped. I am the recipient of your offerings. So no matter how you're offering, if you offer into that ritual fire, Om Indraya Swaha, this offering unto Indra, Sri Krishna says, that offering comes to me. Again, not me as an incarnation of Lord Vishnu, me as Ishvara. Sri Krishna here speaks as Ishvara. So reiterating what we've just discussed, there is but one God, only God. Here our context is one God. And whether you worship that one God, calling that God Indra or Shiva or Vishnu, or if you call that same one God Jesus or Allah or Yahweh, it makes no difference. You are worshiping the same God. Any offerings are made unto that one God. Natu mam abhijananti, but, this is one of those really important ones, but mam abhijananti, those who don't know the one to whom they're being offered, na tatvena, those who don't understand tatvena in reality, those who don't properly understand, which means those who are, many people making these ritual offerings mechanically, without knowledge, those who are praying to some imaginary concept, an old man with a white beard on a throne in a heavenly domain, clearly they na abhijananti. Sri Krishna says they don't know the one whom they're worshiping. Does it make their worship invalid? No. Their worship is perfectly valid and meaningful for all the reasons we discussed at the very opening of this class. So this isn't to criticize their worship or to invalidate it in any way, but Sri Krishna is making a distinction here. And the distinction is, if you worship with knowledge of the one whom you're worshiping, that worship is so much more, that I have to rephrase it. That is the worship of an enlightened person. One who truly knows the one who is being worshipped. Such a person is enlightened, knowing who and what Ishvara truly is. Which means those who worship without full knowledge are not yet enlightened. They live with wrong understandings of who and what is Ishvara, and they suffer the consequences of not knowing. What is the consequence of not knowing Ishvara? What is the consequence of not being enlightened? The consequence is getting reborn again and again and again, going through life's ups and downs again and again, suffering again and again. And that's what Sri Krishna says here. He says, te chyavanti. They fall, literally. They fall away. They fall away from the highest goal of enlightenment. They fall away. In one sense, they fall away by being reborn again and again, rather than remaining non-separate from Ishvara. When an enlightened person dies, that person remains utterly non-separate from Ishvara. When an unenlightened person dies, they are born again into a state of separateness and suffering. So that's one sense of this chavanti, they fall. The second sense is those who pray with this attitude of spiritual materialism, and that is they're praying for the wrong things. So instead of praying, give me this, give me that, why not pray, hey Bhagavan, please help me gain the knowledge of who and what you truly are. Look at the difference between those two prayers. If you pray for knowledge of Ishvara and you become enlightened with that knowledge of Ishvara, you are fulfilled, absolutely content. With whatever you have, you're content. With whatever you don't have, you're content. With whatever problems you have, you're content, because none of that robs you of contentment. You have an inner sense of peace that is unaffected, utterly unaffected by any external situation. Tell me, what is better, to have that unshakable sense of contentment, or to be constantly struggling for yoga and kshema, get what you want and take care of what you've gotten, even with Ishvara's support. If you pray, oh, hey Bhagavan, please help me with this yoga and kshema, you're still involved in this struggle, this ongoing struggle for contentment. And that's basically what life is. People engaged in this day after day struggle. And as the commentary I referred to before, it doesn't have to be a struggle. You can do all the same things in life, including coping with the problems you have right now. Without doubt, all of you have some major problems in your lives. Everyone does. That's life. In life, there are major problems. And that's inescapable. As long as we live, we're going to be facing major problems in life. The solution is not in solving every last problem, because as soon as you've solved what you think is the last problem, what happens? You know. You say, oh, finally, thank goodness, I can finally sit back and relax. How long does that last before the next the next problem arises? If you have time to enjoy a cup of tea before the next problem arises, you're lucky. Chances are the problems are already there. So life is this unending sequence of problems that we have to face and deal with and cope with. There's no choice in dealing with problems. There's a big choice in the attitude with which you confront those problems. As I said before, if you feel like you're on your own, like that kid on the bicycle, it's scary. You can fall off that bike anytime. Your life can just come crashing down at any time. When that child knows dad is holding on to the bike, the child can enjoy the ride. When you understand Ishvara is present in your life, taking care of your yoga and kshema, because you understand who and what is Ishvara, then you can deal with those problems with a sense of security. It won't be so frightening. In fact, you might even enjoy it. Have you ever considered how boring life would be if there were no problems at all? It would be insipid. And there's another. I lived in this beach community in California called Santa Barbara. Very beautiful place. And the weather, they had some of the best weather in the country. People who lived there had an expression. I can't say this. Another blanky day in paradise. You have to fill in the blank. This is what they themselves would say. Another blanky day in paradise. The meaning is, when the weather is nice, day after day after day, you take it for granted. In the same way, if you had no problems in life, life would be insipid. Somehow the ups and downs of life give our lives texture and meaning. It's like when you some of you like some chilies in your food. That spice gives the food some kind of taste dimension. So, and just to finish his line of thought, and we'll see one more verse. The line of thought is, why is it that some people like these roller coasters in amusement parks? I don't. I couldn't stand that. But there are plenty of people who do. Why? You get it, right? Oh, it's so much fun. You feel like you're about to die, but it's so much fun. The point is, and the point I'm making here is these ups and downs of life are not the problem. The ups and downs can even be fun if you meet them with the right attitude. And it's that attitude that Sri Krishna is describing here. Let's see one more verse. Yanti deva vrata devan, yanti deva vrata devan, pitrun yanti pitavrataha, pitrun yanti pitavrataha, bhutani yanti bhuteja, bhutani yanti bhuteja, yanti madhyajino pimam, yanti madhyajino pimam. Sri Krishna continues to talk about worship, but with what intention do you worship God, and what is your understanding of the God that's being worshipped? In the Bhagavad Gita, especially in chapters 14 And then 17 and 18, Sri Krishna uses an analysis in terms of the three gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas. Sattva, the principle of purity and balance. Rajas, the principle of activity and passion. Tamas, the principle of darkness and inertia. And he uses that analysis here, that threefold division, in understanding the attitudes of those who worship. So first he talks about those who worship with a sattvika attitude, a very pure mind. What about those? Those who are deva vrataha, those who worship the gods, as opposed to, they, especially in this country, they make the joke, so many people worship money, wealth, power, fame. So here we're talking about those who worship the gods, whether that God is Jesus, Allah, Shiva, etc. Deva vrataha, those who have pure hearts, those who have sattva, who worship the gods. Yanti devan, those who worship the gods. Yanti, reach devan, the gods. Those who worship the gods reach the gods. Whatever you worship, you get that. If you worship money, you get more money. If you worship power and work at it, you get more power. If you worship fame, you get the idea. Those who worship the gods reach the gods. Next line, Pitra vrataha, those who worship the ancestors. Now, this is a little foreign to us in modern times. In ancient times, it was more of a factor that the ancestors are held to reside in a heavenly domain. And just like you can worship the gods in the highest of the heavens, you can worship the ancestors who dwell in an intermediate heaven, if we can call it that. So those, and Madhusudana makes this connection in his commentary, those whose minds are sattvika, very pure, they worship the gods in the highest heaven. Those who are more rajasika in nature, who have this urge and drive and passion, they worship instead the ancestors in that intermediate God. So Pitra vrataha, those who worship the ancestors. Yanti, they reach Pitrn, the ancestors. Those who worship the gods reach the gods. Those who worship the ancestors reach the ancestors. And third line, Bhutejyaha, Bhuta ijya, those who worship the bhutas. Some of you know the vernacular usage of that word, bhuta, as in bhut and pret, just to make it very clear. The demons, those who worship the demons. Who would do that? Well, those whose minds are tamasic. So those whose minds are pure worship the gods in the highest heavens. Those whose minds are rajasic, full of passion, maybe they worship these ancestors. And those whose minds are lowly, with this tamas, tamoguna. Who would they worship? Again, I can't imagine those worshiping demons, but apparently there are some people, or even some quasi-religions, where they speak of Satan worship. It's hard for me even to conceive, but there is such a thing. So the principle here is you get what you worship according to your intention. If your intention is to worship the highest gods, that's a very pure intention. If you worship with a lower intention, some people who have this so-called black magic, this black tantra they talk about using some mantras and evil eye and all of this stuff. I don't really buy into that anyway. But there are plenty of people who do. And to live life with such lowly intentions has consequences. If your intent in life is very lofty, that will mold your life and lift you up in life. If your intentions in life are very lowly, what are the consequences? What is the consequence of having money, fame, and power as your ultimate goal in life? What are the consequences? Terrible consequences. You become insensitive. If your goal in life is money, power, and wealth, who cares about anyone else? Me first. And you can imagine how that person will affect others nearby. So intention in life is everything. So here we have 3 levels of intention: sattvika, rajasa, and tamasa. And now Sri Krishna goes to a 4th perspective. Those with the highest intention reach the gods. Those with intermediate intentions reach the ancestors. Those with lowly intentions reach the demons. I'm paraphrasing the first 3 quarters, but he says in the final line, Yanti madhyajinaha api mam. Madhyajinaha, those who worship me. Those whose intention is fixed on the one God, the only God. Those who worship with knowledge of being with that attitude of non-separateness Sri Krishna used before. Those who recognize that one God as the essence of all that exists. God is here now in the form of all that exists. So Sri Krishna refers to that one God as me, and here the pronoun is mat in madhyajinaha. So those who worship me, recognizing the truth of that one Ishvara, what do they achieve? What do they reach? Mam yanti. They reach me. Those who worship the gods reach the gods. Those who worship the ancestors reach the ancestors. Those who worship the demons reach the demons. Those who worship me, Sri Krishna says, reach me. But one last time, when Sri Krishna says me, he's not talking about Arjuna's charioteer. When Sri Krishna says me, he's not even talking about himself as an incarnation of Lord Vishnu. When Sri Krishna says me here, he's referring to himself as Ishvara, God of the cosmos, creator, sustainer, destroyer, not the one God, the only God. So those who worship that one God, that only God, and the only way you can worship that God is with knowledge. Because without knowledge, who will you pray to? Without knowledge, you'll pray to the God on top of Mount Kailasa. Without knowledge, you'll pray to the God on the throne in the cloudy heavens. But with knowledge, you can worship that true God, the God that the sages were referring to in that mantra, Ekam Sat, that one God, that only God, Vipraha Bahuda Varanti, that one God who is referred to in many ways by all the wise ones. With proper knowledge, you worship and appreciate that truth, that one God, and in that way you are blessed. Through your knowledge, you are blessed. That's a good place to conclude today. I'll just remind you, we have satsang on the first and third Sunday of each month. Tomorrow is the 5th. So there will be no satsang tomorrow. The following week we will have satsang. We'll conclude today with our brief prayers at the altar. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Avamahe Kaving Gavinam Upamashravastumam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspataha Nashrinvan Uttabhisira Sadhanam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramhanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadyantu Ma Kaschad Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat.